Good afternoon. My name is Mitchell Armstrong, and I'm very thankful that you have asked me here today. I'm here to talk to you about a few different things, but most importantly, I'm here to talk to you about literacy and the ways in which we can together close the gap in student achievement in literacy. I'm going to try to do this by explaining a few things. First, I'll go over a short agenda for the presentation as a whole that lays it out in very friendly terms. I hate coming to PDs or different presentations where everything is laid out kind of brick by brick, layer by layer, and it's very, odd. I get it, and I understand why we've always done it that way, but there's different ways to do it. I'll then talk about some key specific issues that may be allowing for those gaps to occur, and then some ways we can work together in order for us to close those gaps, in a much easier way than we may have previously thought. I only know this because of the fact that I am part of a district that's been able to achieve some of these very positive results. Keep in mind, though, that throughout this presentation you will see a lot of facts and actual things pulled from my district. Some of them are really good, and I'm very happy and proud of, and some of them need some work. And I purposely left them in and put them in there because I want you to be able to know that we are not perfect. I'm not coming in to save the day. I'm not coming in to say, oh, this is the most wonderful thing that's ever happened. No, I'm realistic, and I understand that there's pitfalls, not because there are ineffective teachers or the system's out to get anybody, but I understand that there's a want and a need for our teachers, staff, and students to succeed. And this is what we want to happen. So I really want everything to be on the table because as educators, we are all working together collaboratively to make sure that we are all on the same page to do whatever is best and necessary for our students. And the best way to do that is for transparency. A little bit about myself. I'm a special education teacher from Independent School District 622, which I'll call ISD 622 from henceforth. We are the 16th largest school district in the metropolitan area of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul in the state of Minnesota, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And we operate on a budget that would put us down around the 30th largest. So we're already off the bat having some serious headwinds to go up against. A few themes I'll be bringing up throughout the day, or throughout the presentation rather, is that I want you to internalize, as I'm sure many of you have, is that equity is imperative to student success, and that each student has to get what they need in order to be successful. Our diversity is what makes us a stronger unit. You'll see that more in a minute when I talk more about my home district. And that I believe that there is nothing wrong with being realistic in our goals, as long as they are still high expectations and goals, and we are always pushing our students, and we know our students, because knowing our students allows us to always be one step ahead, and allowing our students to know that they are continuously going forward. So let's go with that, and we'll move on to our next slide. In our next section, our second slide here, we're just going to kind of look at a breakdown of how the presentation will go today. So our first section that we'll look at is the reality and what the need is. What are the actual landscapes of our classrooms, the names and the smiles or frowns of faces in our classrooms? Are we looking at a sea of Caucasian faces, African American faces, Somali faces, Hmong faces? What are we looking at in our classrooms? And those types of quote unquote courageous conversations are extremely important, and I'm sure we're having those in our classrooms, but it's always critical and imperative to continuously be having them in appropriate and effective ways, making sure that those are conversations that you're having with students in all ways, whilst always remembering that you are being culturally responsive. Number 2 is the professional development plan, and this is my favorite part, believe it or not. I think teachers sometimes get a little bit jaded when getting to parts of the professional development plan. I've heard many times, a groan or a sigh, but I promise this is not that aspect. The professional development plan um, is one that works for the staff and the students, not the other way around. And when I developed it, I really, I really took a step back and said, okay, what professional developments and implementations have I been a part of that I said, that's not really so much for me, especially as a special education teacher. What ones just didn't hit the mark, and which ones I said, yeah, oh wow, that one really, I can implement that. I can modify it and accommodate it for my students and the general education setting it works for. And I took bits and pieces of that, and I created what I thought was a really, really great system that has shown to be effective. And our third and final one is the evidence. How do we know if it worked? And I'll tell you right now, this is something that you'll be doing once after the initial setup of the professional development plan. Once you get going, this will be something that you'll be doing throughout the year. So I'm just going to broadly say now, evidence is something you're always going to be finding, and you're always going to be looking for and executed. So in a broad stroke, you can say evidence is something that's always in the air. So we want to make sure that we are always seeing evidence of appropriate gains and when looking at literacy, uh, foundations of those things. So when looking at where our current need is, there are many, many factors that we can look at. And the interesting thing and kind of the frustrating thing is that it's going to vary district by district. It's going to vary almost school by school, and you can even bring it down to street by street. Um, so for most districts in the Twin Cities here, well, and you can really stretch this out to most districts nationwide, some of the factors that we were able to deduce that are consistent throughout are these ones here. So if you are thinking, hey, we're having some gaps here, and this could be related to anything, not just academic performance, behavior, hygiene issues that kiddos are coming in with, any other types of things that seem atypical for students, period. So average family income, socioeconomic status, and I think that's probably one of the most influential things that comes along, period, across the board, end of story. We see that socioeconomic status, or SES, is the single most forefront thing that can show access to different services for a student. In the general education environment, if we separate them out, you see that it shows access to things such as after-school activities, before-school activities, summer activities, and that not only builds things like friendship, social skills, things like that. It can harbor things, programs such as Young Scholars, different gifted and talented programs, or even different tutoring programs, things like that. If we were to look at it from the special education standpoint, it is extremely detrimental for those kiddos as well, because data shows that a family who has a much higher socioeconomic status has the financial means to continue the accommodations, modifications, and services that the student has in the home that they have at school. So socioeconomic status is a huge, huge aspect of the current need that a student may have. Access to those services, which goes back to SES, and access to equitable educational resources. So that, again, everything that would have to do with all of those things that were stated in the socioeconomic status. So everything almost kind of relates back to socioeconomic status. So it's just about keeping yourself abreast of what exactly we're talking about and what exactly we're thinking about in that. It's absolutely, again, imperative. Equity is what that student needs. What does your student need that you're thinking about? You see that a student is low. You see that a student is failing reading. Their literacy scores are extremely low. Their MCA scores were extremely low. What are we going to do about that? Well, first let's take a step back and look at that equity piece. Okay, what are they missing? Now we get to kind of look at some data, some baseline stuff. So on the top left side of your screen, all of these are at ISD 622. Some of our classrooms and score from the 15-16 annual report, and we're seeing our enrollment by ethnicity and our enrollment by special population on the left side of the screen here. So you can see on the far left, top left, we see ISD 622. So what you can see is that we have a smaller percentage of white enrollment by ethnicity versus the districts surrounding us. So you can see Matamidi, South Washington County, Stillwater, White Bear Lake, and Mounds View, who have a much higher white enrollment population. We have a much higher enrollment population of all the other ethnicity sections, excluding American Indian, as we share with Matamidi there. But Asian, Hispanic, and Black, we nearly double in almost every category in our classrooms. If we look by special population, we, in ISD 622, our ELL population is off the charts in relation to the other school districts around us. Our special education population is higher than all the other districts around us. Our free reduced lunch population is substantially higher than all the other districts around us, nearly double the second highest, which is Mounds View. And our homeless is, unfortunately, much higher. So we're seeing trends. Again, if we think back to that, what are the needs? We're looking at these trends and we're saying, oh my goodness, if we're not looking at it through a culturally, responsive lens, we're seeing it as, oh wow, this district is going to be very, very, very at odds with things. They're not going to be successful in anything. They're going to be struggling just to get kids in classrooms, just to have behavior management. But if we look on the right side, we can see gains in reading and science. So our highest proficiency rates since the introduction of increased rigor for Minnesota comprehensive assessments, so the MCA3, if we look at the top there, we can see that our reading proficiency in elementary school has been pretty consistent. In 2014, we were at 55%, 2015, 58%, and 2016, 57%. The 57%, the 1% decrease was explained as an increase in rigor for our special education population. So the 1% decrease actually is accounted for in an increase in rigor for our students in student services. So that's actually a really great thing. So we've been able to really bump up our scores there. And if we look at the reading proficiency in middle schools, it's a really great bump up there. So what we're seeing is, regardless of these ethnicity and special populations, we're still able to hit those marks. So let that sink in. I mean, this slide in this presentation is probably one of the top 3 slides that I find the most important. It is imperative for our students to succeed. We all know that. We've all heard the sayings. We've all read the whiteboard. But to look at the raw data is important, because you can't argue with data. You can't argue with hard facts. And with a percentage of 53% students on free reduced lunch and 47% students who are white versus 88% students are white, you know, assuming they're English language speakers. We're, quote unquote, going against the grain here. But what is it that ISD 622 is doing? Could we be doing better? Absolutely. That is not to say at all that we could not be doing much better. But I think that there, and you'll see later in the presentation as well, there's some things we're doing really, really well, and some things that we could be doing a little bit better. But it just goes to show that there are some things that we're doing that have made some definite progress and gains. Looking at some background and questions and thoughts of ISD 622, I want to draw your attention to the middle right corner. Our superintendent, Christine Osario, her quote, "Success belongs to every single one of us. Our children can and will be up there with every other child from every other school from around Minnesota." That's a very powerful thought to me, and a very specific thing to say. And I think the reason that she said it was because there was some misconceptions. I myself came from the West Coast, and when asked where in Minnesota to work, I had a lot of people give me a lot of different districts to work in, and surprise, surprise, ISD 622 was not in those recommendations. When I went digging, though, I specifically sought out ISD 622. I'm very glad I did, as the support systems, the kids, the families, I'm very, very excited about it. So if we look at our reading all grades here, you will see that the reading all grades, the standard score of 28, 28, 27 in the last 3 years. Our goal is 10, and ISD has gone down. So that is one of those things I had mentioned earlier. One of the cumulative and one of the summative parts that is not that great in our district. But we can see the achievement gap remains smaller than state levels. 622 continues to work towards its goal of decreasing the gap by no more than 10% in 2020. I will say, though, in reducing the achievement gap, District 622 is outperforming the state in science, reading, and math. The gap between white students and students of color is much smaller than compared to state average, and that's something I would like to speak on, the fact that a more diverse district, a more equitable district, allows students to be less marginalized and less segregated in different ways. This is a topic of great contention, though, and when approaching it, it may be something that is done in a very particular way. It's very important to allow people to feel empowered, affirmed, but to know that we are in a place in time and history where we need to make sure that all of our students are getting taken care of, and all of them, especially when it comes to literacy and numeracy. Those two very important things that teach life lessons are taken care of. Before we get into our professional development piece, just a couple things to keep in mind when we are looking at those gaps, because it is extremely frustrating. I understand that. I'm in the classroom too. We know that our kids are coming in with a lot on their minds before they even step foot in our building every day. There may be no access to basic items, food, water, shelter, abuse in the home, verbal, physical, sexual. Kids may have fallen through the cracks in terms of student services. I myself see students brought to me for evaluations in 5th grade, teaching the elementary setting, who should have been qualified for special education services in kindergarten and 1st grade. So these are things that can befuddle them. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, what can we do? What have we done to bridge these gaps? We know that there are immense troubles that our students see. We know that there are immense troubles that we deal with as staff, teachers, administration, paraprofessionals, um, and the like. But what can we do to support ourselves, to support our students, not have burnout as teachers, but make sure that we're getting everything done that we need to do? These are kind of the questions that we need to dialogue in our buildings about, in our staff meetings about, so that when we come to the terms of professional development, which is coming up next, we make sure that that transition is as fluid as possible. That is what's going to make the difference. When we come to the next part, the professional development, there's going to be a lot of ebb and flow. So make sure that you take all of this that we're doing here and know that you can cut stuff out, add stuff to it, whatever you need to do that works for your site. As we move on to the professional development piece, it's important to remember that this is probably the biggest part of the entire presentation in terms of its support to the student and the staff in general. I like the quote here in that professional development, when done correctly, is better and more effective than any other type of direct instruction at this level. And by that I just mean that we've all been to a professional development that is a bit frustrating. But I think when done correctly, and you'll see, hopefully you'll agree with me, that the professional development that I have crafted together is more effective in a lot of different ways. Before we move into the actual plan, I just wanted to show a little bit of how we treat the culture of professional development at the school that I work at, actually. We treat it very much head on. And I loved this quote by Reeves. Sustainability is more than a victory in an endurance contest. Even an ill-trained fried food addict can finish a marathon or climb a Grand Teton. But in my case, these accomplishments are greater testimony to my irrational persistence than to the sustainability of these efforts. I just kind of let that sink in. On the left and right sides, you'll see those two pulled outs right there, the balanced literacy professional development for all elementary school and middle school classroom teachers, a deep implementation of culturally responsive instruction and classroom management strategies. All along I've talked about this, and it continues even then. Good balanced literacy trainings beget and continued understanding of a culturally responsive classroom begets. I think that that's imperative to know. At my school, we really try to make sure that our PDs are both of these things. We have a canon that says if all students are taken care of, then all students are taken care of. That's a very important thought process that we have. We want to make sure that our proficiency on reading is our first goal, and noted in our charter is that Cowan's proficiency rates on reading state accountability tests will increase from 56% in 2017 to 62% in 2018. The gap between white students and students of color will decrease from a 21% percentage point gap to 15% or less. That is our first percentage point in our reading proficiency. And as you can see, the fact that we are talking about race, students who are white and students of color, and the accountability for proficiency rates kind of go hand in hand, and that's something that you'll see continuously throughout the entirety of your school. So this is where it's all kind of led up to, is the Common Core standards and implementation within current Minnesota practices. And this is just a little bit of a segue before we get into the professional development. I apologize. I really wanted to put this in here right before, because I find it very, very, very important to see where we are specifically in Minnesota, as Minnesota is its own little nebulous specificity, in that it doesn't play by anybody's rules but its own, which is extremely, I find, refreshing. Common Core standards are something that came into play a few years back, and was a way to level the playing field for states to not only be rewarded financially for following standards that were nationally approved, but to really um, compete on a international level. The United States wanted to get on that track. Minnesota has kind of gone its own way in doing that. So the reason I bring this up is that what does that do for our standards in literacy? Well, funny you should mention that. It brings us to a place of partial Common Core standards for some things and not adopting Common Core standards for other things. And that's what I'll be bringing up in the next couple of slides. So keep that in mind when we're going through here, and we'll go from there. So now that I'm able to focus a bit more on where we are now in Minnesota, we can say that it's understood there's been and still quite a bit of blowback in the world of Common Core. I am from the West Coast, so there was a lot more pushback nationally, but I think we can all agree that the best way forward is to see the positives in the Common Core standards, and that it is about global competition, and that the standards are attainable at the global level in which the United States has not been at in well over 50 years. The idea that each child has the right to have access to the same knowledge regardless of the socioeconomic status that they come from. There's that trigger word again, the socioeconomic status that goes back to the causes, or where they are regionally from in the nation. Here in Minnesota, there have been sets of unique changes in the first place. The Minnesota Department of Education, or MDE, in relation to literacy or language arts, depending on the district or level, primary, secondary. In 2010, they adopted the Common Core standards in language arts, partly, and then in their entirety, and added some supplementary content. Public schools in Minnesota are required to implement the 2010 Minnesota K-12 academic standards in English language arts no later than the 2012-2013 school year. This is an area in which the governor and commissioner, in conjunction with the MDE, saw value in adoption of Common Core policies. In mathematics and science, Common Core standards were not adopted. This is where I find it extremely interesting. Minnesota, as you can see on the map on the left side of your screen, is extremely unique in that it is the only state to have adopted some, in our case one, and none other. I bring this up because it's imperative to look at these two subjects as two separate entities. This presentation is not about mathematics at all, it is about literacy, not numeracy. Minnesota looked at everything as separate. This is extremely unique in that many states, most states in fact, look at all subjects together. Literacy and numeracy are treated as the same. Minnesota, our districts, have treated them as separate entities, which they are. Minnesota, as you can see in this quote, Minnesota has allotted much more fluidity for its teachers to actually teach to higher degrees of rigor rather than follow a plan that doesn't work. This is key because, as we can see, our students are facing much more challenges than they would have previously. Now, if we see states with the lowest standards of successful stories in the nation, Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Georgia, that lie along that southern belt, we can see that they have were some of the first states to fully adopt all Common Core standards and have been teaching to them since. We have a 1 out of 50 situation to show the rest of the nation how we do things here in Minnesota. So with that, we can see that our benchmarks are going to look different. Our standards are going to look different, but we've been able to really make it in an appropriate way that helps our students succeed. Now, as we move back into our professional development plan, this is something that can take place over a course of 1 to 2 years or 3 to 5, depending on the size of your school, the willingness of the administration or staff, or any combination of any other points of reference. Our school has a relatively small staff and student size. Our school runs about 432 students, a staff of about 33, and a very positive culture and climate that allowed for us to be in unison with each other. So as you can see on the left side, we see fall, winter, spring, and summer. So this is for literacy. You can have it done with math. You can really have it done with anything. That's why I like these. It's almost a template. So this is time to come together as a staff. It's known that there has to be a decision by a principal, superintendent, to change the direction of Common Core. But by giving the staff the chance to have constructive and directive conversations, that's the most important thing. So if we look at fall, we're seeing all staff collaborative meetings. Now, what I mean by that is that the staff gets to come together. So this is year one. The staff gets to come together during maybe the last 10 minutes of a staff meeting or set time during their PLC meetings or whatever you may do in your school. Like I said, it is known that there has to, by the law of the union or the rules of the district, the decision of the principal, their superintendent, etc., gets to make the final decision. But in the direction of Common Core or a variety of other things. But by giving the staff a chance to have those constructive and directed conversations that are, of course, on topic, positive, constructive, inclusive, what's best for students, and what is a healthy and work environment for teachers, allows for teachers to have a voice during a change that otherwise may not be met with an immense or at all amount of acceptance. It will be met with frustration and headwind. Furthermore, it very well may down the road may show much more higher rates of frustration if appropriate, and it won't be implemented correctly. This is a time to be used during weekly staff meetings in a choral setting for the first 15 minutes of an agenda or at the end, and this is to be kept within a staff setting. This is key because we as a school must have a united, positive, and responsive front when winter arrives. We're not selling it to our family, we are leading by example. That is the most important part. We are leading by example. We're not selling anything. This is going to be the new culture and climate that we're just adding to our culture and climate. Now, in winter, year one, school and family listening input sessions. This can be seen as a very tumultuous time. That's why that fall section is so important. But because of the time we have spent hammering out details in the choral setting as performing certain tasks and aspects, that big picture type style, we will be able to meet in a large venue and then in small venues. The large venues will be met with an open forum by the administration, principal, director of special education, and can't stress that enough, learning strategists, etc., those bigger named people. This is the time in which families will probably be frustrated. There's been so much around Common Core standards already, and with Minnesota being a holdout, quote unquote, in the media, it may be a hot topic. This is okay, and it's all in the delivery. This is a large group setting, and it's a time for the admins to really say, with a very carefully worded speech type deal, but realistically said set of words, followed by questions. We know there's going to be a great level of support systems available for our families, but they may not work, which is okay. This is a big one. Okay, this is before conferences, before anything like that. This is almost like a town hall type situation. So of course, there's going to be a lot of people that react and then process, and that's okay. That's just how it's going to be, but it's going to allow us to be more responsive to our communities. And that's what we want. We don't want this to happen any other way than face-to-face. Then we move to a small group setting. That's in parent meetings or by questions of parents, of high flyer kiddos or the more involved parents. The best time to talk to a parent about upcoming changes is probably going to be conferences. This is a great time to extend our conference times just a little bit to talk with them about what's going to be happening. And we want to remind them that we as teachers and our administration are working in tandem to make sure that we're having the best concrete evidence and practices in place for their child as their teacher. And then we move to spring and our positive learning communities or PLC groups. The spring will be used in the grade levels to departmentally in special education and in specialists to hone in as the how to implement the processes will look in the grade level. This is the paramount piece for successes of the students, but really the teachers they have the say um, as to what the implementation looks like in the initial idea or the ground level floor. Okay, this is really important because it's them who says this is going to work in my classroom, this isn't. I say this because there are hundreds of books, videos, and prefabricated plans that can be purchased or printed out for free online and just handed to them. I could send off things to you via email, but retention, contingency, and student success would become an intense problem, and the culture and climate of the school would suffer incredibly. Furthermore, there wouldn't be any stakeholders, including you in this room. It is important for the teachers to tell administration what it looks like for them as they've been told what the parameters look like, what the state wants, and what the students need to achieve. In my eyes, the successful implementation of any program I have ever seen, teachers have had some sort of control and been able to teach inside of a box, which almost sounds like not good, but if they're given parameters, they can really work magic. Before the summer, I can tweak and assist and go over things with the grade levels and leads and all of that, the administration. But if I'm able to guide throughout the process, things may be much more organic than taking care of things already just by themselves. And then, of course, the most fun part, summer. So there is a 2-week period in the summer. There will be a camp, a retreat. It's a bonding time, however you want to do it. Keep in mind, you can do it however you want, in which the principal, director of SPED, and the superintendent will work with the teachers in a real-life trial and error, ironing out final details. This is the most important step because from the top of the district down, the teachers can see what is expected, which is wonderful because it already is something that the teachers have already written within their grade level. And the teachers know that the stakeholdership from the top down is there to support them. And at this point, the processes have become so cyclical in the teachers that they are teaching the administration who is on board with it now as well. The continuation and the continuum is something that is blurred. It's all one circle. This is key because the trust and fluidity is something that many teachers and parents and even administration may have never thought possible with any type of Common Core implementation. Year one may seem absolutely crazy, but after you've made it through, you move on to year two, which is the implementation with students. So the first step is to introduce the material. What is the content to be addressed? What is the mini lesson, etc.? These are questions that are already attained because of last year and the professional development in the summer. And of course, this material will be decided by the district, by your superintendent, special education director, principal, etc., in line with the Common Core standards for literacy. Check for prior knowledge. So every student establishes a base of knowledge across a wide range of subject matter by engaging with works of quality and substance. We become proficient in new areas through research and study. They read purposefully and listen attentively to gain both general knowledge and discipline-specific expertise. They refine and share their knowledge throughout writing and speaking. Then comes the I do, you do, we do, you do model, which is probably one of my favorite things ever. I do, I show you as a teacher, you do a model, we do together, and then you do on your own. Not only does it provide correct implementation as a student, but it allows them to work independently after they've seen the teacher do it twice, once independently by themselves, and then once working with the teacher. Independent work and assessment. Self-assessment is key to critical thinking and promotes ownership of successes and areas of need. This also will come in handy when we start talking about evaluation tools, as they've been able to assess themselves effectively and appropriately. Now we get into that measuring of the evidence and to be successful within that. And a lot of people do the measuring of the evidence as after the fact. after the year, you start the year, and I believe this is in Marzano's book, you start the year below grade level, all of your students. You go through the year trying all these things, you then take the test, and by June, July, you get the results back. It's in the papers again that, yet again, your students have fallen behind, and you go through the whole thing again. It's a constant cyclical cycle of being behind. That doesn't promote a culture of kindness, integrity, and social justice for the teacher or the students. So how can we do that? How can we change that cycle? You have to be excited about it. You have to be willing to try new things and try something different. Something that I want to point your attention to is the District 622 graduation rate that is higher than the state average. So from 2012 on, we can see that our graduation rate was, in fact, higher. It was on par for 1 year and then higher consistently for the rest. So it's very interesting to see that, yet again, going back to the very first slide, that equity piece, our standards are the same that every other district has. Is it the fact that our evidences and measurings that we're about to talk about, that we're doing it consistently throughout the entirety of? I believe that that has something to do with it. I think that that is, part of the missing piece here. Let's see. Moving on to establishing learning goals and tracking student progress and celebrating those successes. This is all intertwined with that evaluations. We need to look at a lot of different things here. So distinguishing between goals and learning activities. The goal is long range, while the activity is what are we going to do to get them long term in terms of content. Have students chart and graph each learning goal. Students can track their own progress after they have identified their rubrics and their specific learning goals, which relates back to the content that we were learning earlier in the professional development. Recognizing and celebrating growth. I cannot stress this enough. Celebrate every victory. Remember, we were talking about that piece. Students are coming in with a lot of stuff. We as teachers know we celebrate victories all the time. You have to celebrate those victories. Every point they go up, you have to celebrate it. We also have to take the time for each student to celebrate their achievement and to be recognized. To have students identify their own needs, especially, or at the very least be aware of them, and to be celebrated for growth in this as a cycle, that to me is extremely powerful. Marzano in the books has always said, in a system like this, on virtually every student will succeed, in a sense that each student will increase his or her knowledge relative to specific learning goals. It's interesting coming from a special education perspective. It's easy, in a sense, because I have goals and objectives to play by. That's almost what you're going to be doing. Every student, with your blessing, is going to have their own goals and objectives. You then have it to go on. It's a very powerful thing, but it's going to year-round allow you to evaluate and see where they're going, so you will know almost immediately if they are getting or not getting the content that you are giving them. The I do, you do, we do is going to give you that exact thing that you need. Student engagement is also something that will allow you to evaluate and know if things are working. These really are wonderful tools that keep in our toolkit here. I chose to focus on these specifically because I think that they work well in all classrooms, from general education, special education, specialists, and can be adapted and modified regardless of what you do. There are many things that I find difficult to take at face value to use as is, but these ones work really great. I love the idea of high energy, both animated behavior as the teacher, as well as a more brisk pacing of the curriculum. They're learning so fast that they can't even stop to think that they aren't. Missing information, fill in the blank, mental games, and other types of stimulations that are puzzles or games. Like this is that informal assessment that we do all the time. And since they're doing their own goals and benchmarks almost, they're also testing it too. That cyclical thing we were talking about earlier, it's always going to be a circle. Purposely getting it wrong. I always get things purposely wrong, and my students have gotten to a point where they think I'm just the silliest goose in the farm. They're always checking me for wrong answers. It's one of the most fun things in my entire teaching career, to be wrong, because my students always catch it. The self system, using me, self, and I in different situations and domains. They have to be able to be advocates for themselves. Mild pressure. Under the right situations, if a student knows that they may be called on, they may be more apt to pay attention and remain engaged. This one shows a little bit of, has been seen as a little bit controversial in that students buckle under pressure. But again, in the right situations, by knowing your students, which goes back to the first two slides, we have to know our students. If we know them and they can handle it in an appropriate and effective way, that's the real world. That is that real world piece that we're teaching them. The real world is always calling on us. Mild controversy and competition, allowing mild bouts of competition in the classroom in a way of games, debates, or contests. I love this one, and I think that all teachers kind of do too. That debate factor, contests, games, these are all ways to almost trick students into that continued work. Word work games, literacy games, contests, debate, where spelling is only allowed. These are all wonderful ways to show evidence-based continuations of effectiveness. Continue working on that, and it will always show you the way that they're going without having to loop back at the end of the year. You can always capture and catch what they are not doing or able to do effectively before it becomes an issue. Establishing and maintaining effective relationship with students is probably one of the most important things, if not the most important. I keep finding myself saying that everything is the most important thing, but I think as teachers we've all found ourselves saying that as well. The most important key highlights are know, show, and use. We are a team here and succeed and fail as a team. Marzano says that in his book, and I think that that one sentence can sum up so many things. And in different schools, that culture and climate piece, again, is extremely important. So know something about each student and understand that being disenfranchised is a normal part about being a student. They know that they are or are not being understood. Show behaviors that show affection for each student that doesn't seem fake. Students know when you're trying to be real with them or not. Use humor when it's appropriate. They respond to playful banter with their teacher. They often see a wall between them and their teacher. Again, we see a lot of stuff going on that prevents them from being effective in the classroom. If you can use these establishments of maintaining effective relationships, then that will bring you back to those establishing learning goals, tracking student progress, and celebrating successes from Chapter 1. It's a little backwards, but I really wanted to show those from Chapter 1 in our books. That's why I bring up Chapter 1. And by doing that, then you'll be able to break down those barriers. You have to allow the student to see the genuineness that you have for them in order for them to be successful with you. All of these things are like a puzzle, or dominoes more specifically, that are continuously flowing and going through. It's difficult and crazy, but I promise it gets very, very easy, very, very fast. As we come near the end of our presentation, I want to leave you with a few quotes. When we are looking at assessing the cause of learning and the ways in which we get there, let's change the cycle. If we expect teachers and schools and leaders to improve professional practices, the decision of making, then we must first give them the different knowledge and skills than they have received in the past. That is imperative here. It's so important. That professional development piece, it seemed different, I hope, in that it gives power to the teachers and administrators at the same time. Teachers and administrations, who they themselves mostly were teachers and beyond educated people, know how to use those common sense attributes. And they have a sense of mind to be able to know what is effective, what's not, what's equitable, what's not. These are not things that are so far gone that you're not able to use them in an effective manner. but we have to almost pull back sometimes and allow ourselves to ask those questions from the beginning. What are the causes? What is the need? What are those PD pieces, and what are the evaluation techniques? High-impact learning is also something that I wanted to address. And high-impact learning is not about creating a life of efficiency and ease for teachers and leaders. It's about undertaking the challenge of professional work with deep meaning and lifelong impact. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is many, many things going on in our day. It's not about getting things done as quick as you can at 100%. It's about going through the mud. It's about climbing the mountain. It is about getting it done and doing the best you can at it. It may sound taboo, but I think we know you're not going to save every child's future. From kindergarten to 12th grade, we don't know where our kiddos go after they leave those doors with a cap and gown, if they get a cap and gown. But maybe some of these professional developments, if they keep us going as educators, we can do a bit better in ways of higher impact learning. The impact on the student is that it shows that we are better at our jobs by letting them do some of the deciding. They're not being told all the time. Marzano and Reeves have given us a lot of different opportunities to show these to them, and that is a good thing. We've been able to see what the reality and the need are of our students, what the professional development plan looks like, and what the evidence is. And the evidence, to me, is the most interesting part, as in relation to the professional development plan, it's all cyclical. It all moves around. And if we're doing it right, when we're done with that professional development plan, the evidence is always being brought in, and not in a difficult data-driven way. Data-driven, yes, but not in a way that is any more intrusive than it should be. And by doing that, we can catch things early and allow ourselves and our students to be more successful. I'd like to send you all this PowerPoint, or feel free to please go to my district's website and look at our annual reports, isd622.org, and look at those comparisons of classrooms. Look at those gains of reading, not just reading maths and sciences and humanities as well. Again, remember, we are operating in a very tight budget. We are operating with very low socioeconomic statuses. We are operating on low teacher salaries, but for some reason, our students continue to excel in many areas, very slowly, but they do. And that's the most important part. They continue to thrive, and that's what we want. I'd like to thank you again for being here today. Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share in a very sensitive subject with you, but allowing me to share some of our successes and some of our pitfalls with you as well. Again, my name is Mitchell Armstrong, special education teacher from Independent School District 622, North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale. Thank you so much.